and thank you everybody for coming here. I'm going to start by saying a little bit about myself and the background to this session, using the abstract and the title, and then I'll ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves briefly, and then we'll start our discussion with some questions from me. We might have time for questions at the end, but if we don't, there's a reception afterwards, which we will all be at, and so you can ask your individual interest questions at that time. So let me just expand a little bit about what Joe said about me. I have been living in Japan for more than half of my life, and my area is educational psychology. But before I got into this area, I worked in Sydney as a counselor with homeless people and alcoholics. And that's what kind of got me into becoming an educator, got me to Japan. After 2 years of working with people who I think were a bit given up on life, they had given up on change, they had no hope for the future, and I got burnt out, just seeing the same faces again and again after really trying to help them get their health and mental health back. And I decided I wanted to work with younger people with hope for the future. And I think that connects to a little bit about our discussion, this idea of having hope in life and a purpose for living. Okay. So as well as doing my research in educational psychology, I also teach a lot of different psychology subjects: social psychology, psycholinguistics, sociolinguistics, in general psychology. And I think, those kind of feed into this session as well. Okay, if we look at the title, there are kind of 4 keywords there that I will focus on, but I want to ask you for us to get some kind of feeling about what you know, how much you have been thinking about these different issues. I think most people are interested in these ideas of longevity and happiness and community and lessons from Japan. Everybody wants to learn about Japan. How does Japan make this amazing society work? But one thing I want to get from you is how much you know about Japan. So if this is your first time in Japan, can you put your hand up? Okay. If you live in Japan, Japanese or non-Japanese, live in Japan. Okay. I guess other people are kind of in the middle there. Not first time, but and maybe interested and know a bit about Japan. One of the keywords that is not in the title, but it's in the abstract, and is the idea of ikigai. How many people have heard that word, ikigai? Okay. How many people know what it means? Maybe different. Okay. And again, just to see the balance of people here. Who are in the Aging and Gerontology conference? Can you put your hand up? And the psychology? Is that AI? and ACEID. Okay, so we have a balance as well. Okay. Okay, well, first, this idea of longevity. I was looking at some of the statistics in available on the internet, the countries which have the longest lifespan. And I think the top 10, they were all mostly small countries. And in Europe, some small islands. And then it really gave me another perspective on this idea of community. Okay, Tokyo is an amazing city, but I don't think it's such a happy city. But I think part of it is the size, with the isolation within the size. But yeah, this idea of longevity, long life, being the size, but the spirit of community kind of hit me when I saw the sort of the ranking table. I will continue kind of talking about discussing this idea of longevity. It's not just the length of life, but as the previous speaker said, it's the quality of that life, physically and mentally and spiritually, emotionally. But the next keyword, happiness. And I think everybody knows it's a kind of a keyword, subjective well-being, SWB, or happiness. Again, this is something that we could talk about for the whole session. We'll do a little bit about it. And if you have questions about it, please continue them later. But it's a topic that often comes up at IAFOR conferences. And one of the big questions is, why Japan is so low on subjective well-being. But I'll ask specific question about that later. Education, we have lessons from Japan, but also not just learning from Japan, but the role of education in informal education, in subjective well-being, in longevity, and the role it plays in Japan. That is one of the important keywords. In the abstract, there are kind of two main questions I think we really want to delve deeply with. One is that question of education, that's kind of the subtitle of the session. The other, I'm going to read it from the handbook. Okay. How education in the form of, I can't read my own writing, continuous learning, teaching, mentoring, curiosity can help sustain lifelong purpose and emotional and mental vitality. So I think that's with our session here, with our panelists here, bringing together their expertise in the different areas, and they've all kind of have recent important books they will probably be referring to, but how we can kind of bring some, not necessarily answers, we might develop more questions after the discussion, but just integrating their ideas. Okay, so I'll ask each of the panelists to now briefly introduce themselves. First, maybe we can start with Lowell, my brother. And Lowell and I have been involved with IAFOR for quite a while. And when we talked recently about this, he finished a draft. He's in the process of writing a book about his research that's in the abstract. And one of the key words is community. So I guess if you can talk a little bit about that in this panel.
Good. Well, thank you all for coming to Tokyo. Thank you, Dexter. My name is Lowell Shepard. Relevant to this afternoon, the key things to tell you is, number one, I live on a sailboat, and I've lived on that sailboat for 7 years, the bulk of my time, sailing around Japan. I've been in Japan 29 years, been to all 47 prefectures, professionally been involved in sustainable community development through a NGO that I founded in Japan many years ago and spread across to Hong Kong and Singapore. In fact, one of our former Singapore board members is here today, Elizabeth Hernandez. But I'm also an author and I write books. And I ended up in Okinawa 2 years ago by sailboat, having slowly made my way there from Tokyo, which is my home port, 5 years previously. And it was while I was in Okinawa, I discovered the word moai, which turned out to be a concept that I was familiar with in the developing world, basically self-help groups that have a defined set of relationships. And I heard the word moai before I heard the reference to Blue Zone book or the book Ikigai, in fact. But that caught my interest, and I was intrigued by the social fabric in Okinawa, but also came to my surprise that the numbers of Okinawa in terms of prefectural data on longevity were falling, that no longer was it the crown jewel in Japan, has the top prefecture for aging, but it was actually dropping in the ranks. And so I went in search of longevity hotspots in Japan using prefectural data as my map, and ended up traveling what was meant to be a seasonal journey through Japan a year ago, turned out to be a year-long journey, interviewing superagers, some centenarians, and accumulating data from local prefectures, and trying to discover the mindset. What is the behaviors of those who not only grow old, but grow old well? And my particular concern is in that period of morbidity between, in Japan, they define healthy lifespan as living your life unassisted. And of course, lifespan is death. And in Japan, nationally, that gap is about 12 or 13 years. So I was in search of people who were living well into that period of time and still living independent lives. And I found the number one characteristic that carried over them all was a strong sense of community. And when there was no community, you don't have longevity hotspots. You have the extreme opposite in some cases, called lonely death syndrome. And so that's kind of what brought me to the table today. And through that process, I met Hector, who's been an advisor and a guide, and Professor McNally as well.
Okay. Please, Hector.
So I'm from Spain, but I've been here in Japan also 20-something years. So it's, I think, like everyone, like half of my life here in Japan. And I was originally an engineer. So I used to make useless robots. So I do agree that when someone makes a useful robot, it will be amazing, but we still have to see when that happens. And some years ago, I changed. Well, I've been writing books about Japanese culture since 20 years ago. And exactly, I think now is exactly 10 years ago, I was presenting my book, Ikigai, in Spain. This was the first book about the word Ikigai ever. Nobody knew this word outside of Japan. So you can blame me. I think many people raise their hand. You can blame me for seeing this word Ikigai outside of Japan. Now there are hundreds of books about Ikigai. I think many people ask me why. I have the same question to everyone. And I think it's it's because in the world there is a need now for meaning somehow. There are many things happening. That's why I think the ikigai, the purpose, it's something that is Japanese, and with this word we can express many things around the world.
Hi, hello. My name is Yukiko Sawano. I am a Japanese, only Japanese in this panel. I work in a women's university in Tokyo. It's called the University of the Sacred Heart Tokyo. In Japanese, it's Seishin Joshi Daigaku, located in the midst of Tokyo. But I've been working in this university for 20 years. But before that, I have been working for the Ministry of Education and in a National Institute for Educational Policy Research. And in Japan from year 1988, it started to implement the policy of lifelong learning, and in view of course, longevity. But at that time, the expected lifespan was only 80 years old. And also we had a big problem concerning formal education because of too much competitiveness. And this entrance examination hell was at that time a keyword. And to combat with this too much expectation on formal education, to make it more flexible, was the idea of implementing lifelong learning. And also at that time in the 1980s, still the Japanese economy was flourishing. So it was expected that the people will have more free time, and in order to cope with such free time and a longer lifespan, everybody thought we need more time for ikigai. Ikigai life and lifelong learning could give ikigai to self accomplishment and so on. So it was implemented. And however, before it was really implemented, the Japanese economy went decrease, and there was a deep recession, and it's still 30 years lost era or something like that, we call it. And so, however, nowadays, the healthy lifespan of Japanese people is ever more increasing. And there is a keyword like 100 years life era. And actually, I have in my private life, my mother is already 93 years old. And my mother-in-law is also 93 years old. And my mother was working until recently and driving until 92 years old, and still in a very healthy condition. However, my mother-in-law is suffering from dementia, and now she's in a elderly people's rehabilitation facility. But so that kind of thing is happening in my surrounding people. So today's my own research interest is more on policy making. I am a comparative education specialist, and so I have been conducting how to make systematic lifelong learning opportunities for every citizens. And so in that regard, I have been looking at Scandinavian countries' experience for over 30 years. But however, today's theme I thought it would be very interesting for also for my research, but also for my private experience. And I made maybe
Oh, yes.
could I present the slide? Yes. And I have been involved in the last 3 years in a UNESCO project on reskilling and upskilling of older adults. And this was a comparative research with Singapore, Japan, Sweden, United States, and Colombia, five countries. And we made case studies of older adults, how they are facing the issue of aging, but also how they are continuing lifelong learning in order to contribute to the society in many ways, not only to continue working, but maybe to socially contribute, like volunteering and so on. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I will next ask a question to kind of try and instigate or stimulate discussion. And I also want the panelists, please feel free to respond to each other freely, okay? Don't wait for me to ask you. It would be great if there's a lot of interaction happening. And also the audience, if you think of any questions now, please write it down. If we have time at the end, then short questions usually mean that we can get more questions. So if you can write them down now while you think of them. Okay, the first question is from developmental psychology, and maybe many of you have heard about Erik Erikson's kind of 8 stages of humanity. And it's very old Western-centric theory, but it's still very much used in developmental psychology and educational psychology. And there are lots of shortcomings that I'd like to hear the panelists' response to it. In his theory, the last stage, 8th stage, is where people, I think, after 65, about 65, so it's a very, very old theory, look back, reflect on their lives. And if they feel satisfied with their achievements or what they feel they have achieved, then they have a kind of sense of integrity, ego integrity. But if they look back with regret and a lot of negativity, then they have a sense of despair. I would like to maybe ask the respondents, should we just completely throw this theory out? Does it need another stage? Are there other kind of theories or semi-theories or your own ideas about this idea of the last stages? Okay.
So I didn't know about this, so I read a little bit about it, and I think I disagree with almost all the stages. It's very negative. I read it when I just turned 45, and 45 is the next stage. It's almost like I have to stop doing things and start thinking about my past and have regrets. And also what you also said before, a very important word there, the word hope. And I think that's the main, if you focus too much into analyzing your past and everything, it's not good. And you have to, like, something to hope for, to look for. And as the other keyword that Yukiko is using, like lifelong learning, is like, I'm not sure he likes to say it's never too late. So it's never to, maybe we need to create like a new phase. When you're 65, it's still the beginning, for example. It's so it's like, and in one of my books, I looked at like people who flourish. There are so many cases. Like sometimes we focus like there are many people who are suffering in your 80s and 90s, but there are also many cases of like they're called late bloomers, that you start like painting when you're 80 years old and you become world famous when you are 95. So I'm very interested in late bloomers, and I think that gives hope to other people. So maybe it could be like late bloomer, still not too late, and things like that.
Yes. At university, I have a class for BA students about lifelong learning, outline of lifelong learning, or something like that. It is compulsory for those who would like to have a certificate for museum curators, and also I also have something similar course for those who would like to become social educator, social education. We call it for the community learning. We have 社会教育. It's in parallel with school education. We have social education, which is committed in some places like library, museum, and kominkan, lifelong learning centers or community centers. And in Okinawa, it is quite, they do a lot of social education, and kominkan activity is quite big. In the textbook of lifelong learning, I also write some textbooks, but this Erickson's developmental stage is it is always there in every different textbooks. And in Japan, this Erickson's framework was developed in 1977. I just checked my textbook. But before that, American psychologist Havigast, I don't know how to pronounce, but we say Havigast. Havigast also, so he made, it is said in the textbook that he was the first person to show the idea. It was in 1948, and his developmental stage was like six stages, but also ends at the elderly in age, older age. But so Erik Erickson's developmental stage showed how people will grow or develop themselves by conflict with some kind of critical issues which they face in different stages of life. And this Erickson's eighth stage is the last stage that people will face the desperate, and then struggling with the desperateness. He will have some kind of integrity. Is it correct? And I often teach about it. But this stage of life is, in the case of Japan, it's getting quite longer. The last stage of life is getting quite longer, so we might need to classify even the last stage. But still, our people are senior citizens in Japan. They will feel so much anxiety because they face a lot of losses, with friends or loving ones, and solitude is also, loneliness or solitude is also a problem, because many people are not getting married these days, and then they are getting older and they live alone. So the issue of desperateness, how to struggle, is still a big problem in Japan. And then I think the relation with people and community like moai, to intentionally make community in such traditional way would be quite important. So to think about this kind of thing, I think this framework, Erickson's framework, still lives.
Well, I'm not a psychologist, and I had never heard of it before until you raised it with us a few weeks ago, Dexter. And so, like Hector, I researched it. My reaction to it was, I wrote a book quite a few years ago called Boys Becoming Men on male adolescent development. And it was then that I developed a concern about a linear view of life versus a circular view of life. And Erickson's kind of steps forward is based on the assumption of life is a line. And I think when it got in terms of longevity and aging, and Professor McNally had made me think about this months ago, that in the West, we kind of see aging has, these are my words, I'm not meaning to put words in Dr. McNally's mouth, but aging is growing irrelevance. So how do we get people to age gracefully, painlessly, but we assume they're increasingly irrelevant? Whereas the Eastern approach is much more circular. And so in my exploration into longevity hotspots and pockets throughout Japan, and saw many different expressions of community. Moai was the Okinawa example, but there's many other ways that community is practiced. And the book that hopefully will come out later this year, early next year, is actually called Longevity and the Art of Community, Lessons from Japan. And so there's an art form, community and art, you don't usually put those two concepts together, but Japan has centuries-old practices in expressing community that's circular in its nature rather than linear. Because with a nuclear family, you're always looking forward to the future. You want your children to have a better life than you have had. There's a developmental aspect to it. But community in Japan is multi-generational. So rather than helping somebody grow old gracefully, but we know they become increasingly irrelevant. In the local communities where I've immersed myself in the last 2 years, in places like Shimane-ken and Nagano, etc., the communities are multi-generational. It's expressed at festival time. Remember, in my little village where my boat is currently moored, my own longevity laboratory, there's 29 people. I'm the third youngest in that 29. But at festival time, all the returnees come back with their children and grandchildren, and it's amazing to watch the interaction among them all. So I have an aversion to thinking in terms of family or time or life in this progressive, and then finally there's a termination point. And to cite an example, I have a barber friend, Shige-san, on the island of Ama in Shimane. It's 2 hours off the north coast of Shimane, and I went to visit him. I heard there was an 80-year-old barber who wants to set the world's record for being the oldest practicing barber in the world at age 100. So that's his ambition. And to see him have friends of all ages, he took me to coffee shops. We talked to fellow 80 and 90-year-olds. We talked to teenagers, all called him by his first name. But even after somebody dies in Japan, they're still part of that circle, because he does 100 sit-ups a day in a machine called WonderCore, and he does it at the ancestor shelf in the view of his parents and his wife who's passed away, etc.
So I want to ask you, so why do you think? I think it's true what you're saying, that in Japan there is some sense, at least, and also I like always to say that Japan also there's a big division between cities and the countryside. I think we all agree that at least in the countryside it's easier to see these communities. And why do you think it's that? And I also agree that when they become older, I think there is a tendency in the West, especially from countries like mine, like Spain, and I think also Greece, like our dream is to retire and do nothing. We want to, like, I will retire when I'm 60 and get my pension and do nothing. But I see in my family now, when everyone retires, it's like there is a sense of like you want to be useful, and there is no support around you to be useful for anything. It's like everyone is working. I don't work anymore. And here in Japan, there is, at least in the countryside, there is these support networks that help people feel useful, or like the moai. So how do you see, how is that? How can we make people feel that they are still useful for?
Well, that plays into the whole concept of ikigai and purpose. And let me just give you a snapshot of two women who influenced my book and my journey. One was my mother, and one was a lady we called Obachan. They knew each other. Both died at 92 years of age. Obachan had the gardens below our house, and I have a family home in central Japan. Both gregarious, but Granny of the fields, or Obachan, had purpose until her area of morbidity was so short. It was only weeks. She gardened every day until just weeks before her death. And she was a member of the community. Everybody loved her. Some people she was grumpy at times, and she lived with her grandson. My mother, on the other hand, who died within the same period at 92, always gregarious, but she was in a retirement village in Canada, and COVID killed her out of loneliness. And I think the other thing that killed her is she was put into a single generational unit where the only people around her were people her own age as well. So I think the issue of ikigai is so relevant. And I'll just finish that my statement on that by saying I've been working with some actuaries in Hong Kong who hired me to gain insights into my research, etc. And they said ikigai is such a nebulous term. Like, what does it mean? And I said, well, my observation is in these Japanese longevity hotspots, it has to do with duty and role. You know what your duty is within that community. And I think there's no more duty, I think, for my mother, but there was for Obachan. Even though she didn't need the carrots or the daikon, she kept growing them.
Hector, what do you think about that idea of ikigai? Because you've also written about ikigai for teenagers, so maybe it would be quite different depending on the age.
No, but I do agree that it is about having, I usually say it's about having something to do, some people around you that love you, and something to hope for. So as long as you have those three things, and then, so I think you say ikigai is nebulous, but I think the term happiness is more nebulous.
Yes.
So I think this like something to do. If you know you have something to do, something to hope for, and you have a community that love you, probably you will feel happiness. It's like I think it's more fundamental to have that. And I'm also curious about what you say about circularity. What do you think? Probably when you meet people, like there's also old people who forget how they felt when they were teenagers, and some other people they feel like teenagers even when they are at the 80s. What do you think is the difference? Like people, and maybe you also lifelong learning. Like, what do you think is the difference between an 80-year-old person that feels very old and someone who still feels like it's 18. And that's, そうそうそう。何が違うんだ。80歳のまだまだ生き生き、15歳の気分だ。
That's an interesting question. I was just thinking about this intergenerational interaction made in lifelong learning. How do I say settings? For example, in Shibuya, where I live, in my it's a very busy district in Tokyo. Young people in the ages like 20 to 30 or 40, they made a kind of a lifelong learning community called Shibuya Daigaku. It's not a real university, but they call it Daigaku is a university. And the idea was to even those who established it was very young generation. They thought of the area could become very. There are a lot of lonely people living and elderly people as well, and to have more neighborhood-like community. They made this lifelong learning organization, but also kind of a place they made renovating unused fruit shop to make it like a community house so that the people in different generation can gather here. And in that way, they are having their own ikigai. But in terms of promoting lifelong learning from the government, learning for ikigai was seen something luxurious, and they are not giving budget for learning for ikigai, and something like hobby or liberal arts things are thought to be too luxurious, so users should pay, and only the public fund should go to the learning that will contribute to society, like to nurture volunteerism or something, citizens, active citizens training or education. But nowadays, many people thinks that their ikigai is to contribute to the society, and it is both for the younger generation and elderly people after retirement. Of course, there are some elderly people over 65 years old that they would like to continue working and to have some income, not because the pension is not enough, but that is only minority of the people. And many elderly people would like to, what they feel ikigai is to support younger generation. So there are some similarity, but maybe making vegetables and fruits to distribute to younger people in the neighbor would be ikigai for such people and so on. That's it.
Okay. Maybe this is a good chance to bring in the second question. I think it connects. I think in a sense you've answered it in a different way. But it's a question that often comes up at conferences like this about Japan. Japan is a rich, developed, highly educated society. In that group of countries, Japan always ranks low on subjective well-being, on happiness. But if you look at other kind of scales or measures of wellness, Japan ranks high. So wellness, I don't know exactly what it means, but it's a kind of pursuit of happiness or pursuit of well-being, physical as well as emotional, social well-being. But it's a paradox, high on one, low on the other. How would you answer that paradox? Okay, let's start with Yukiko. Yeah.
Yeah, I think from the Japanese value, we think it's not so nice to say that I am very happy, and we are quite how do you say so maybe the well-being is nowadays a keyword for education, and how to improve well-being of Japanese society is a governmental issue these days. And they say there is a Japanese characteristics of concept of well-being, and it is different from European. And it's not only individual happiness does not connect directly to the well-being, and so the people would like to become more contributing to the building of society or community development and so on.
Okay, Hector.
Yeah, I do agree. I'm always very suspicious when there are statistics about well-being and happiness that are based on self-reported answers, basically, because, as he says, like Japanese culture will try not to say that I am very happy, because it sounds like everyone around you must be miserable and I'm the happiest one. So in cultures like mine, like in Spain, it's like you want to show off and say, I'm the happiest in the room. So it's very different, and I don't know what is very difficult to. It's better to look at, and I think the Japanese government is trying to make like a statistics of like what really makes people like, okay, there's real well-being behind these scenes, that like statistics of depression and suicide and everything. I think now in Japan they're still very high, but since one good news about Japan is that the statistics of suicide are the lowest ever since they started tracking in the 70s, which is very good. It means it's going down, but they are still one of the highest in developed nations. So it's still work to do, but that's something that shows that there's probably more well-being in Japan now.
Yeah, I would just say when it comes to global rankings and global data, I've come to be skeptical because it's not always like for like in terms of the questions being asked. But even in Japan, I said before, I use perfectual aging data as my map and compass through Japan. But even that is too large of a scale. One thing I have discovered and observed in my longitudinal research the last year is that there's a direct link in my mind and what I've observed between the quality of community and the level of joy or happiness in somebody's life. And even in this tiny corner of this remote island where I live, along a 40-kilometer stretch of coastline that comes in a deep inlet and out the other side, there's 12 hamlets ranging from 29 people, where I am, to 150 people. And it's just well known which are the happier villages. Same structures are in place, the same incentives are in place, the same yakaba or city hall that overrules it. But I've come to observe and believe that positive community is a fragile thing. and one has to care for it and be careful of. And this is like one community near me where the middle-aged has actually taken over control of the community, and the older ones have released their responsibility too early. And as a result, all those same structures and expectations has become suppressive for everybody under middle-aged, and everyone is extremely unhappy. So I distrust global data generally because it's not like for like, and but the quality of community will affect my quality of life directly.
So can I ask you a question? Difficult. I guess there is no answer for this. But when you put human beings together and you try to make communities, there is something inevitable that there will be conflict, and and bad things might happen. So how have you seen this community that you said that? What is the difference of a community that will be stay for years and one that will crumble? And like some older guy wants to take power of the moai or something, or there is like ego things. Like you never know.
I'm still discovering. It is a chapter in my book about the dark side of community. So I don't have any answer for you, Hector. You've seen it, but in Okinawa, there's the village of Ogimi, which is the longevity capital of Okinawa and was featured in your book. What was your observations there?
Yeah, I also saw that there were many sub-communities. There were 18 communities, like in the different, I think that the main thing, that the positive thing I found is that the 2,800 people who live in Ogimi, they all belong to one of those communities. So there is no one, even if you lose all your family, because they're very old people. In Ogimi, I met like 108 person that was taking care of their garden. They all belong to one of the communities, so they all feel like, in some sense, a little bit of responsibility. One of the main activities, as you know, is like, it's not sophisticated. They get together into there and they drink green tea and they do karaoke with one machine that they have, like very old karaoke, and that's I think that's enough glue. And of course, then there were some actors, I would say, that they're more proud and they try to show off because they want to be in the book. They're more, and then you realize this person is always everywhere. He's a little bit, but I didn't see any dark side. Maybe I should have spent more time. But maybe there is. I think there is always like someone when this, and also your experience. You've been in many countries dealing with human beings and like finding a way to make a community that's healthy. I think that's difficult.
I'll just add to that, picking up what you just said. I found I created 3 silos where I put information and interviews I did over the last year, and attributes of people who are superagers living happy lives. And one of those silos is karaoke. And the actual act of singing, but also singing together with no judgment and laughing together, that is an attribute of remote Japan. And the other silo, I mentioned community already, I'll mention the other silo, which I attribute Catherine Lavender for giving me the word when I asked her last year, you've curated all this information into the database in Chicago. What's the one thing? And you said curiosity. And that became a silo, and that has to do with lifelong learning. Let me just say then finally on your question to me, which I didn't answer. I think what is the difference from community to community that can make the difference even though all the rules are the same? In Japan, there's the saying, the nail that sticks up gets hammered down. We've all heard that. But in communities where people are happy and the fundamentals of community is being practiced, the deferential, the sumimasen, the monthly cleanup, etc., But yet in those happy communities, there's always the characters. There's the nail still sticking up, and they're celebrated rather than hammered down. So somehow it's that hybrid between the group, but allowing the individual to shine. That's happiness.
Nice. Okay, we're limited for time. So what I'm going to ask at the end is 1 minute lesson from each of you for everybody. What can we learn from Japan, from your perspective? 1 minute each person. And please continue this discussion at the reception afterwards. Okay, Yukiko, 1 minute. What lessons can people from outside Japan, or even people from within Japan, like in not so happy places, what can we learn from your research, from your...
Yes, in terms of lifelong learning, the global trend, I am in a network of Asia and Europe lifelong learning. It's called ASEM Lifelong Learning Hub. And the global trend, both in Asia and Europe, is more to have skill-oriented learning for all the generations. But the Japanese people, so the buzzword is reskilling and upskilling. And in Asia, Singapore is the top runner for the reskilling and upskilling. Also China and maybe more in Korea. But in Japan, Japan is the least people are involved in reskilling and upskilling among the OECD countries. And it seems such kind of learning for work does not give ikigai to the people, and they are more happy with maybe learning karaoke in Kominkan community centers. It's a very popular course actually for many people, and so like in a country in Sweden, also it's people are living longer, and they put importance in participation of culture, and it seems the retired people are also participating in various learning which connected to culture more than one. Sorry. Okay. So that I think that kind of thing Japanese people are feeling happy with the same thing. So I think our government should invest more in that kind of learning. And I don't know if you
so not de-skilling, but there's no focus on skills. Okay, Hector, 1 minute.
So to say lately I'm very interested in something about Japan that many people in the world know about Buddhism, but in Japan the main religion, the original one, is Shintoism. And Shintoism is many things to say about it, but it's mainly a nature. It's about being, when you go to shrines, I think many people here was their first time in Japan. I recommend you to visit some shrines, and they are usually surrounded by nature. So it's one thing that the Japanese people have been connected with nature for many thousands of years. And another thing about this is a common thing between
1 minute.
Shintoism and Buddhism is rituals. So I think like Western mind is very focused on goals. We have to achieve this. We have to become healthy. We have to become happy. Whereas Japan is always at the subconscious level. When you work in a company, in the government, or in communities, it's about the ritual. It's like we get together, we clean on the floor. So, and it might sound a little bit stupid, but I'm also changing my life to focus more on my daily rituals than in like super goals, like rituals over goals. That's my message, my lesson.
Lowell?
Okay, I'll give you 2 cultural tidbits. what I've noticed about super agers in Japan, what their playlist is and what their prayer is. You can Google later to find out more. Super agers in Japan's playlist is radio taiso in the morning, karaoke at night. Google it. And secondly, super agers have a prayer, and it originates in Nagano. It's pinkoro. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that properly, but it's essentially, and they have a place to go to pray that prayer. It basically means genki to the end, or be alive and well, live your life, and then drop dead.
Okay, so we'll end on that note. Thank you very much for the panel. Thank you, everybody.